Welcome to the Walking Shoulder to Shoulder Step 12 meeting. It is with much warmth and love that I introduce Tim M., who will be speaking for 30 minutes on our 12th step, which reads, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. This will be followed by a Q&A. And over to you, Tim.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim. I'm an addict. Just wave at me, Andrew, if there's any problem with the sound. Step 12 is a huge topic. I'm not going to take up too much time of the short time available covering the other steps, but just a couple of small basics. My clean date is the 24th of July 1993. I was in my early 20s when I had my last drink or drug. I'm not in my early 20s now. To put it mildly, the nature of my relationship with substances is that although it seemed at the time that I was operating on desire and will, the fact is I wasn't. I was operating under compulsion. And the compulsion to drink, the compulsion to massively overshoot, to drink way more than was even pleasant for me in the moment, regardless of consequences. That was because of compulsion. I'm the worst witness when it comes to why I drank and used, and it's not just drink and drugs, it's certain behaviours as well I've had to be very careful about. I'm the worst witness because the point about being an addict is that one is deluded as to why one is doing it. One is acting under compulsion, convinced by the compulsion that one's doing what one wants to do, because one would go completely mad realising that there's something like a parasite controlling one. How do I know I was acting under compulsion? You can't tell whether you're acting under compulsion by how it feels or what you think you're doing or what you think your motivations are. Because the nature of compulsion is that will be a lie. One has to look at whether I did what I intended and whether I regretted what I did afterwards. And I always intended to not so overshoot it would ruin the next day or ruin my relationships with friends. And I woke up every morning regretting what had happened the night before. That is the sign that one is under compulsion. It's not what one thinks, it's not what one feels. It's the intentions and then the regret afterwards. The very, very bad news if you're an addict, and I certainly am, and I imagine that you are too, is that mechanism of being subject to compulsions and blinded in the moment into thinking one's acting perfectly rationally and reasonably, once that mechanism has been set up, and I'm afraid one has it for life. One need only look at people who use again after many years to realise that the mechanism was locked and loaded, ready to roll at all times. There is an answer, though, and the answer is almost as disagreeable as the problem. The answer is to become, and I'm going to put it in mildly theological terms, but to be a servant of God. Now, what does that mean? It means that what I want in itself is no longer a relevant question in my life. The job is to say to God, what do you want me to do? Now, God is reasonably nice. And so over time, one discovers that one wants to do the things which are the right things to do. So it's not that one has to go for the rest of one's life, as it were, eating the thin gruel of God's will. God's will starts to become a far more joyful thing than self-will ever was. So there is a bit of a silver lining, or rather the cloud is not a cloud at all, it's something else. But that's the solution, and it's a little bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, because I have to say, after many years, it's only very rarely that it occurs to me to drink or use or go back into it, as they say. And you say, well, do I really have to turn over my whole life for that moment? Well, unfortunately, yes. It's rather like with insurance. One can't go to the insurance company and say, well, I'm going to be burgled next Thursday at 2 o'clock. So if I can have insurance from 5 to 2 to 5 past 2, and I'll only need to pay the premiums for that little bit of time. I don't need to pay annual premiums. Just 10 minutes worth of insurance will do me. They say, no, you have to pay a year at a time. I suppose we're paying a day at a time. Because one never knows what day it's going to be that the thought occurs, that the addiction gets reactivated. So the insurance has to be in place all of the time. Now, although it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut, having this relationship with God so that when push comes to shove and the thought of drinking or using occurs to me, and not only occurs to me, but feels very powerful, as though it's a fait accompli, as though it's what I'm definitely going to do, something seems to step in and pull me back. And thought is the last of it. Thought might come in at some point, but it is not a thinking response. Just because I lack a mental defence against the first drug doesn't mean that the defence is itself mental. The defence is of a higher and older order than that. Although it seems like it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut, the fact is the nut of my addiction is, as it were, one of many nuts that need to be cracked. The rest of my life is a nut that needs to be cracked. So the sledgehammer that cracks the nut of alcoholism happens to crack the nut of everything else as well. What's the term in the big book for the everything else? It's the spiritual malady, which is simply Bill Wilson's term for what others call the human condition. Finding oneself lonely and isolated on a planet which is very inimical to life. All you have to do is turn on the news to find all sorts of stories about how many people have died in all sorts of gruesome ways without even wanting to. It's not it's not a safe planet to be on. Life is not safe. Finding oneself running around in an easily squashable human body. Finding oneself with a set of motivations in the world which can barely be satisfied, and when they are, they disappoint. This is a bit of a rough deal. Life is a rough deal, in principle. Or at least the opening hand, the hand of cards that one is dealt, is a rough hand of cards. And the game seems to be, will they work out that there must be more to the world than this? And the questioner gestures in a general way at the world. You look around at the amount of unhappiness, and you listen to people who are unhappy outside AA, and it takes 4 or 5 seconds before you realise they're unhappy in exactly the same way as people in AA or CA or Al-Anon or whatever other fellowship it is that you go to. Sometimes I think it's maybe because people have never spoken properly to people outside their fellowship, that they hear people talking frankly and candidly in a CA meeting, and they think, oh, well, that's just us. We're like that. We're not like earthlings. We're not like those normal people. Well, it's because you haven't talked to them. But you see, the thing is, if you try to talk to people who aren't addicts, it takes quite a lot for them to open up, and they haven't learnt the language. So it comes out all wrong. And they're worried about the impression that they're making. That makes it come out wrong. But I can tell you, there's no difference. The volume, I think, might be turned up a little bit in addicts, and there's certainly, in my case, when I got clean at 21, as I started using, and because my addictive processes started actively pretty soon after my 15th birthday, I was like a 15-year-old in a 21-year-old's body. 6 years is not a lot, but it's a lot at that age. So there's an extra dose of immaturity on top of the general human condition. There was also a pile of wreckage left by the fact that I'd been an absentee landlord in my life for 6 years when I got clean. So there was a lot to clear up. So what is promised here is an entirely different life. This is not a bolt-on, it's an upgrade. The material life is not lost, but it's placed in a higher context. And I think it's well said that the programme is step 12, and the other 11 steps, their purpose is to fit myself to be able to do step 12. And I've spoken to a lot of people over the years who are, as we call them, slippers. They're people who've relapsed, particularly after many years. If one relapses after a few weeks or months, it can properly be asserted one hasn't recovered, one simply resumed. It was only a matter of when. But people who've genuinely got reasonably well and done the steps enough to stay sober and clean, and they've started to, they maybe sponsored a few people, done some service, secretary to meeting, that sort of thing. But then, at 5, 10, 15, 20 years, they relapse. You get one of two stories. The first one is that the steps were never completed in the first place. Either the amends list wasn't finished off, or the amends list was tiny. It had 10 people on it or 15 people on it, and that's not going to be enough. I was retiring and reclusive and almost like a hermit when I was using, and yet I had scores of people. So most people are more outgoing and knew more people than I did. So 10 people, that's not enough. So that's one category, is people who didn't complete the steps. And that's a fairly straightforward explanation. The other category, it's very interesting. People say, yeah, I completed the steps several times. Oh, you completed? You mean you came out the other end? The term completion can only properly be used with the first 9 steps. There's a line in the 12 and 12 which I don't understand, where Bill says that the first step is the only step that one can do perfectly. I don't agree with that at all. With step 5, either one has told all of one's secrets, and one knows what a secret is, or one hasn't. It's very clear. It's black and white. Either there's a nasty little thing you don't want to tell people, or there isn't. It can be completed. Now, states of mind in 2, 6 and 7, they're difficult to prove one way or another. But you can prove someone's belief in a higher power by the fact they then take step 3. It's done perfectly if it leads to the next step. Step 8 and 9, if you literally can't think of anyone else you've harmed that you haven't done your utmost to make amends to, you've finished. There's nothing more to do. And if it's done, to do it is to do it perfectly. We're not given marks for artistic impression like in figure skating. We're given marks only for the doing of the thing. If it is done perfectly. I think step 1 is the one step it's almost impossible to do perfectly, because being an addict means that one, by nature, cannot look directly at the thing. It's almost like trying to look at the sun. It's too close, and the thing itself is so bound up in self-deception. I think it's the thing which one keeps growing into over the course of one's life. Everything else you can do properly and pretty completely. But with 10, 11 and 12, you can complete 10, 11 and 12, but you wake up the next morning, there's another 10, 11 and 12 waiting for you. So however much you complete 10, 11 and 12 on a Monday, when I wake up tomorrow, I'm back at 0 again. So the last 3 steps can't be completed, which explains why people relapse after many years. It's this belief in completion. So step 12, apart from the fact it's something that goes on forever, it is a daily step like 10 and 11. It's got this notion at the beginning of it of it says having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. Now they say sometimes people make a lot out of as the result of these steps, as though there is no other result. Well, I think there are other results.
You didn't eat that sausage water there, you.
I think there are other results of the steps. For instance, if you pay back the debts to the bank, your debt to the bank is cleared. That's a result of the steps. If your mother now talks to you because you've made an amend, that's an effect. There are lots of results of the steps. But the chief purpose of the steps is to wake me up. If any of you have seen the Matrix films, they're not conference approved yet, so perhaps I shouldn't really be quoting them in a CA meeting. But they live in a pretty grim world of a computer-created reality. And when they wake up out of it, they wake up into a world which is very unlike heaven. So the real world outside the virtual world is a tough place to be, but it is the only place where real joy is to be found. And waking up spiritually don't expect it to be nice. Don't expect it to be comfortable. Expect it to be real. One of the first things that happens when you wake up spiritually, what waking up spiritually means, is waking up to the fact that the material world is not unreal. I know there are religions which hold that the physical world is simply an illusion and we must see through the illusion. People that go down the psychedelic path often hold that philosophy. I don't, because I think people suffering here is real, and we have an obligation to help alleviate that suffering rather than just dismiss the whole thing, saying, well, it's an illusion. If only you took your ayahuasca, then you'd see things as clearly as I do. I think there is a reality to this, but there are higher and more ultimate realities. And this is the realm, it gets called the realm of the spirit, the realm of the metaphysical. And in the chapter We Agnostics, it covers this spiritual awakening very well, because it talks about the physical world and the world of nuts and bolts and reason and logic. But then it says, but have you not worshipped things? Have you not loved things? Have you not acted, as it were, based on faith rather than ordinary material certainties? And what it holds is that the fabric of life is really made up of the spiritual and the metaphysical. Pretty much the only society, I read a fair amount, and I read a lot of things from different countries and different ages. And it appears the only culture I've come across where there isn't a generalised awareness of the realm of a spirit, of the spirit or a realm of the metaphysical is the one we happen to be living in. This is the exception, where you can listen to Radio 4 from one end of the day to the other and not get any sense that there is any world beyond the material world. And this would have been unthinkable 2 centuries ago. There's a British philosopher called John Locke, and in one of his essays, essay sounds like it's a couple of pages long, like for an English class at school. It would take 30 or 40 hours to listen to on an audiobook. That's an essay a couple of centuries ago. But he talks about the awareness of the presence of God and the existence of God. And he takes it for granted that everybody agrees with him, that no one could possibly deny that there is an order to the universe, that God is in charge, that there is a God, that God is good, that these are self-evident truths, and that one derives one's morality, even one's faculty of reason, one derives everything from out there. It hasn't come, morality, fairness, love, worship, have not come because they've developed accidentally out of us being chimpanzees, and the chimpanzees suddenly changed and developed these higher faculties. The faculties come from elsewhere. It was self-evident. It's been self-evident to every other civilization. We're in the exceptional civilization where the shoe is on the other foot, and if you believe in something beyond the material, suddenly the burden of proof apparently is on us now to demonstrate that there is something more to life than stuff. It's possible to avoid the metaphysical, the notion that there is something more, if one fills one's life with work and being busy and energy drinks and nicotine and sugar and television and exciting things and computer games and scrolling and social media. One can fill and oversaturate and overstimulate one's consciousness that one can't even hear one's own thoughts. It's possible to block everything out. What the programme has encouraged me to do is to say no to a lot of those things so I can start to hear what is really there. Spending plenty of time in nature will do it. And it will do it very quickly as well. Spending a lot of time outside will do it. Simply the awareness of the weather. Not shielding oneself from every raindrop, allowing oneself to get wet. I think one wakes up to the fact there is more. But it's not comfortable because you realise you're in a very small minority, certainly in the modern Western world. You don't wake up and discover. It's like, I'll tell you what it's like. It's like there's a club, and outside the club there is a huge queue with thousands of people trying to get in, or thinking they want to get in, but really dawdling, not really going up to the bouncers saying, can I pay me £100 and go in? They're sort of loitering around. And you think, right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go in. I'm going to pay my £100. I'm going to take the first 11 steps and get into the club. And you get a little ticket. You go into the VIP room. There are only 3 other people in there. It's not what you think it's going to be. If you want lots of friends, don't get well. If you want a couple of really good friends, consider getting well. It's a different world. On the other side, it's a different world. It's a much richer world. It's a much more interesting world. I haven't been bored in donkey's years, and I haven't been depressed in donkey's years, and I haven't had anxiety or panic attacks or any of the other manifestations of the various mental illnesses that I came into recovery with. I haven't had them for a long time. It's wonderful, but it's not what you think it's going to be. The other thing about waking up is what you wake up to. This is why the whole psychedelic brigade is off on a tangent. What you wake up to is a profound sense that you've been living a lie, a profound sense that certainly the life I'd been living with all of the ambitions which I grasped, which were offered to me when I was a child and a teenager, about achievement and success and status and finding a place in the world commensurate with my station. To realise that all of that was a wild goose chase, and you've wasted time, you've wasted years, you've wasted decades on things which are not bad, but are nothing, and there is something else available. And you realise that there is one has a role in the universe, a set of roles in the universe, which the world, which roles, if fulfilled, the world won't recognise, will think is bizarre. So, in recovery, when you tell people you sponsor a lot of people, tell people outside, and you don't use the word sponsor, you explain what you're doing, and they think you're doing it because you're somehow generous-spirited or good-hearted or patronising or I don't know what they think, but you can tell they don't quite get it. They don't realise that what you're doing is you're fulfilling the thing that you were born to do, the thing that you're in the universe for. Which is why the question, what do I want, doesn't even come into it. Now, it says, having had this spiritual awakening, we do two things. We try to carry this message to others and practice these principles in all our affairs. There's a line on page 19 of the big book where it says, most of us... that's it. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies in our respective homes, occupations and affairs. That doesn't mean my home, my occupation. And it's interesting that it says occupation, not career. Those are very different things. An occupation is something which occupies you. A career is something entirely different. Homes, occupations and affairs. The point of them is not that they are the important thing we graduate onto having got to step 12, but they are the splendid worked example of how the principles of the programme actually work very well in practice. So it's no good talking in the abstract way about the love of God. What you need to talk about is how you're getting on with people in the office. That's the thing that demonstrates that it works. So there's a little bit of a paradox there. Of course, one has to spend a lot of time doing the external things. Jobs don't do themselves. Occupations don't do themselves. One has to go and do them. But they're not there for their own sake. They're certainly not there for any of the world's purposes. And I don't think an occupation is even there for me to earn money. Of course, it does double as my livelihood. But, and don't ask how I know this, because I can't really say. I'm firmly of the opinion that the money that comes into my life comes from God. And the mechanism happens to be my occupation. But if it wasn't that, it would be something else if I was sincere and seeking God's will. One is lifted out of a mechanical system of the material world into a system which is more liberal, which operates on different rules. Ralph Waldo Emerson talks about this in his essay, The Oversoul. We're subject to different conditions, and the conditions are on page 63. Stay close to God and perform his work well. How do you stay close to God? Talk to God. Imagine God in the room. And that can be God as a traditional image of God or Jesus, or you can even talk to, saints or the Virgin Mary or whatever the characters are in whatever religion appeals to you the most. You can talk to fairies at the end of the garden if you feel that they're connected to a higher power. It really doesn't matter what image is chosen. Talk and sit still, shut up and listen. The answers come back not in hearing things. This is why I've tried the two-way prayer thing. I'm extremely sceptical for lots and lots of reasons, if anyone's come across that practice. God won't be summoned to my table to dollop out wisdom because I happen to have shown up with a pen and piece of paper. 99% of what comes simply instinctively as then one proceeds through the day. One knows what to do without having to think about things or write anything down. But the lion's share of step 12 is sponsorship. Sponsorship is the act of sponsoring. It may be accompanied by the name sponsor and sponsee, or it may not. If one is actively working with other alcoholics and addicts in whatever form to carry the principles of the program to them for their use, then that is sponsoring. All the other forms of service are very good, and I've done things all the way down to conference and board level. And all the things in between, all the layers in between. It's all very good. And the bits of that service where one's carrying the message to the outside world, and I've gone to hospitals and treatment facilities and prisons and all sorts of things, and worked very closely with the armed services, with the NHS and veterans organisations. I've done a lot of that. It's very good, but it's nothing compared to the one-to-one work. I don't get answers directly from God very often. What I get is this: I'm talking to a sponsee, and the thing that it occurs to me to say to them in response to their situation is precisely God's answer to me to address the things I've gone to him for that morning. And you haven't got time to write it down in the middle of the conversation because you're busy with the sponsee. One last thing in the last 30 seconds. A sponsee is not a knot to be untangled or a rag to be laundered. They have to do their own laundry. They have to untie their own knots. You give them the tools. You can give a little bit of practical help, a few worked examples. But people want to become dependent on you, and that mustn't be allowed. It's a business relationship. It's a transactional relationship. Keep it like that, and both people are kept safe. That's all I have for now.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us, Tim. But you're not quite out of the hot seat yet. We will now open up the room for a Q&A session. Please limit your questions to 2 minutes. You can also post a question in the chat or anonymously to the service team if you wish. We especially welcome questions from our newer members. And with that, guys, it's over to you. Time to get curious. Lindsay, come on in with your question.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to all the service team. Tim, just on that last bit that you just said there, and I love listening to you and you share. But that last bit, I just wondered if you had any experience on that, when you said about, my head's gone blank me, like the being business and keeping that as the sponsor. Have you had time in your recovery where you became friends? Because just I have in the past, and I just wondered if you crossed that line and became friends instead of keeping it, and what that looked like, and did you grow from that if you have been there? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so that's a very good question. There are two, I think broadly there are two categories. I sponsored formally many hundreds of people, and I've informally sponsored many hundreds beyond that. So do I have experience of this going wrong? Yes. The two categories of error. The first one is getting too chummy or pally with the sponsee. And part of the problem is one can start to see things from their point of view far too well and fall for the stories that they tell about their wicked family and their wicked colleagues and their wicked circumstances. And you give them advice which then ends up with them making absolute arses of themselves. You're not hearing the other side. One's got to be very, very careful. Maureen said to me many years ago, even the most honest will only tell you 65% of what's really going on. I'm very sceptical about getting too closely involved. Also, if one becomes personally attached to the sponsee, what can happen is one is frightened of saying, and this can be unconscious, which makes it worse. One can be frightened of saying the thing that needs to be said because you don't want to lose them. You just enjoy being their sponsor, or you enjoy the friendship that has come out of it. You're scared that they're going to say, well, F you, that's the end of that then. And it can hamper the sponsorship. One has to be able to say incredibly tough things which you know are going to be very, very uncomfortable for them to hear, and you're of no use to them if you become their friend. On the other hand, there's a real risk of infantilizing sponsees. I think we do this in the fellowship. Sometimes, I'm sure you've heard it in group consciences, where people talk about the newcomer as though the newcomer is some sort of imbecile that hasn't managed to navigate life thus far and is going to hear one thing they find offensive and will run to the door and never come back because they don't know how to deal with listening to something that they disagree with. And this happens a lot in my experience in the fellowship of treating newcomers like children, and Even people, I remember someone years ago reported he'd seen the most extraordinary thing at a meeting where a chap who was 20 years clean was asked, Bobby, could you chair the meeting tonight? Sally's not here, so can you run the meeting for us? He said, I'll just go and ask my sponsor. And he went and asked his sponsor, and his sponsor said, yes, very good, you should go and do that. Trying to solve people's problems, though, trying to get into the detail. As soon as you feel you have to start writing down the details to get them clear, as soon as you start having to go back and ask for more information, you've now been sucked in. And it's very rare that advice that comes out of those very detailed discussions of practical situations leads anywhere. I've talked for years and years and years to people, trying to help them unpick resentments, helping them to look at things differently. And you feel as though you're making the most terrific progress, but then 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, they come back and the tune is the same. And you realise nothing has been done. And a good example is with the resentment inventory. So the program starts on page 63 of the big book. By the time you get to, before that, everything is preparatory material, but the action starts on page 63. The business starts on page 63. By the top of page 67, you've learnt a few things. Resentment is futile. Resentment is potentially fatal. Because of your attachments to these 7 areas of self, your happiness is in the hands of other people. How they behave is determining how you feel, and that is going to determine whether you live or die, because if you feel bad enough with the resentment, it will cut you off from God, and you won't be able to resist the impulse to drink. So you've got to take a different attitude. You've got to drop this dependence. You've got to excuse other people, and if you can't excuse them, to forgive them. You've got to learn to look at things differently, look at what you can contribute to the situation, pray to God to be saved. 4 pages in, you have a solution to resentment, and it is a solution to all resentments that anyone has under any circumstances. The resentment is to drop the haughty attitude, to adopt a compassionate attitude towards another person, and then to be helpful, and then go and do something else. Stop thinking about the thing which is the cause of the grievance. Now, of course, one has to, over the years, continue to take moral inventory. But at 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, the moral inventory with resentment, once those basic lessons have been learned, the moral inventory is this, I've let myself become resentful again. I must let go of it. It requires no analysis. And yet sometimes you have people and I've done it myself, on both sides, as sponsor and as sponsee, years in, doing these incredibly elaborate resentment inventories. Rather than getting over it, I write about it. And there's a lot of doing step work for the sake of doing step work in order to avoid the solution. And so what's worked well for me, and it's funnily enough what my first sponsors did, they said, here's what you do, you go and do it. Then they turned their backs, and it was up to me to pray. It was up to me to drop the resentment. It was up to me to trust God rather than continue to fear. I remember going to a sponsor, I was a couple of years sober, and I said to him, I don't like my work, and I don't like my career, and I don't like my job, and I don't like the people, and I don't know what else to do, and I can't do anything else because I don't have any money, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, trust God. And I said, I don't know how. He said, you do it by trusting God. And I said, but I can't. It's all very well for you. You come from money. I had all of these reasons why what he was saying wouldn't apply to me. He said, change or die, put the phone down. Best sponsorship conversation I've ever had. And I've become a lot more like that. Once you've given them the tools, it's their job to apply them. It's not my job to apply the tools for them. Tom W. says this wonderful thing about sponsees. He says when someone presents him with a situation and wants him to think through the situation, to work it all out for them, he'll say, keep it simple. And they'll say, how? He said, I don't know how, but that's the principle you must apply. You keep it simple. It's your problem. It's not my problem. It's your problem. My job is to give you the principle. And the principle today is keep it simple. Another day it might be breathe. Another day it might be go to a meeting. Another day it might be pray. Isn't that inadequate? No, it's the most adequate thing that one can do. The inadequate thing is getting in there and getting their mud all over you. It's like wrestling with a greased pig. The greased pig loves it and you're the one covered in mud. And the other thing as well, and this can happen an awful lot in sponsorship. Someone comes to you with a problem and you kind of solve the problem and they're fine for 3 days. But as I said earlier, they come back and the problem is there again. And you say, well, I don't have any other solution. I've given you the solution. And what has happened now? Their continued problem has become your fault. When they first came to you, it was their fault. Now that you can't solve it because you've set yourself up as the solver of problems, the untier of knots, it's now your problem. It's your fault that they're still unhappy. And then 6 months later, they go and find another sponsor and this goes round and round in circles. So there are lots and lots of traps, but there's no point in me saying any of this in a sense. One has to get it wrong with about 200 people, and the pain of getting it wrong is so excruciating. Eventually, you learn the lesson which was there, written on the wall in blood 20 years ago, and finally you think, that bugger that I heard when I was 2 days sober, that person was right. And I've been off on a wild goose chase. So that was a long answer to a short question. Lou, would you like to come in with the next one?
Yeah, hi Tim. Thank you so much for your share. I took a lot from it. I think you've just answered my question, to be honest, because I was going to ask, I've just taken on a sponsee. She's my first one. And I was just going to ask, how do you keep the relationship business-like when they're kind of revealing everything about their life to you? I don't know. I'm worrying about being able to do
very that. Good. Yeah, that's a very good question. So what do you do? What do you do with the sponsee? You've got one. What do you do with one? The first thing I do is I give them a full package of program tools. In other words, you see, the terrible thing when you're 1 day or 0 days clean is you have to get to 1 day. When you're 1 day, you have to get to 2 days. And the way you do that is by turning your will and life over to the program given to you by a sponsor, so that your time is taken care of, your time is structured, your day is now structured by the set of sensible actions that the aggregate of CA have decided these are pretty good things for a person to be doing. And this means at any given point, no matter how loud the shrieks of the addiction saying go and use, go and use, go and use, go and use, you say not now, I've got something else that I've decided to do instead. And that will be intolerable if one had to do it for a lifetime, but it is tolerable for a day. And part of what makes it tolerable is right from day one, there are little moments when one gets the sense of, oh, it's going to be all right. You're at a meeting, someone tells a funny story, everyone is laughing around, and you get relief. Now, if one were trying to do this on one's own, one wouldn't have any relief and one wouldn't have the direction. It would be relentless. It would be merciless. But because there are little pockets of relief, when you can breathe, you can get through a day and 2 days. But it still requires an awful lot of willpower. Just because we're powerless, what powerlessness means is not that we have no power, but that we have insufficient power. This is not understood in the fellowship generally. People talk about it as though there is no power at all. If you had no power, you wouldn't be able to breathe or move around or go to Sainsbury's. That's power. You wouldn't be able to think a thought. You wouldn't be able to vote for people in elections. You wouldn't know your own mind, which you do. There is power there. But the powerlessness is a relative powerlessness. So to get clean, you have to use all of the power that you have, and then it is topped up by the fellowship behind which is standing God, and now you have sufficient power. So you've got to give someone a full package of tools. So little bits of 10, 11 and 12 right from day one, planning the day, debriefing at the end of the day, all of those things. You give them that, and then once their mind is starting to be able to work, you start talking to them. You might want to give them a very, very simple step 1, very simple step 2, very simple step 3, the sort that you might be able to convey in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, some very basic ideas, and then you get into the book. You can start at 2 places. You can start right at the beginning, or you can actually start at step 10. To give them a way to get through the day, to handle the emotions of the day, the way to structure the day. Then they have a vessel with which they can start to do the other steps. And so you keep the focus. They have to go blah, blah, blah and tell you what's going on. You listen politely. You get to the end of it, or until about 3 minutes in, you say, I'll listen to the rest later, but for now, should we get back to the business of the conversation? So you let them talk for a bit, but then you get straight down to business. Ross.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for chairing the meeting. Great meeting. Thank you, Tim. I'm taking a few people through the work at the moment, but there have been dry spells in my recovery where there have been no sponsees on. I was interested by what you said about the sponsoring without the label. And if you had any examples of that, I'm not sure if I'm doing it. I perhaps think I am, but I'm just wondering what you meant by that, or if you could elaborate.
Yeah, so part of the waking up is waking up to the tremendous fact that one in a CA room or an AA room is surrounded by suffering, and one has had a modicum of relief from that suffering oneself, and one wishes to help alleviate the suffering of others. This is what I was going to say about the psychedelic thing. The spiritual awakening is not unpeeling the surface of the universe to find all of the marvellous mechanics holding the thing together. It's waking up to the reality of other people and the reality of their suffering, the reality of obligations in all sorts of areas of life. Now, that sense that there is a job to do and we're the only ones who can do part of the job of helping other people get well, they're going to get help from other people, they're going to get help from outside the fellowship. If you've really woken up, in my view, I might be wrong, if you've really woken up, it becomes the most important thing in your day. It becomes your oxygen. Finding ways to be of use to other people, being interested in others, wanting to go to meetings, to have connection, to build relationships. If you're doing that, eventually people will ask you to sponsor them. But that itself, that constant interaction with people, provides endless and constant channels to be a demonstration of the principles and indeed to talk about the principles overtly. So the number of people you're sponsoring in one sense is the number of people that you've spoken to today or communicated to today about the principles of the programme and their application. If you're lucky, you get to be called someone's sponsor. 2 last points. The first one is a friend of mine was asked, how many people do you sponsor? And he said, about half of them. If you're sponsoring people, you'll know what I mean. And the other one that I heard many years ago, someone said he'd sponsored a lot of people and most of them had never forgiven him. In some ways, the sponsor becomes the enemy, and for lots of reasons. It's a natural part of the process. But don't expect or look for gratitude or any of those things. You will get a little bit of that, but you'll get lots of other things too. So you just keep them coming, keep them coming, keep them coming, keep them coming. Don't get attached to any one case. Just next. And the moment the phone is down, you are no longer their sponsor. You become their sponsor again when you pick up the phone. You're not their sponsor in between unless there's a little knotty thing that you need to discuss with someone. The notion of carrying sponsees through one's day like a sort of gaggle of imaginary friends, don't do that. So I think that's it from me, Andrew.